Here's everything you need to know to get a 5 in AP World. Okay, so we're going to start off in Unit 1, which is the period 1250 to 1450. And Unit 1 and 2 are in the same time period, 1250 to 1450. Unit 1 consists of land-based empires, while Unit 2 is about maritime empires. So, starting off, the first empire we're going to is the Song Dynasty in China. The main religion in this time period in China was Neo-Confucianism. It was a mix of Buddhism and Confucian ideologies that came together, which was a change in this period you can talk about. Also, a main important part of this was filial piety, which basically meant that you had to respect your parents and elders and stuff. Second, main thing that's a continuation through all the units up until Unit 9 and 8 was that women had no legal rights no matter what in the system, and they had lots of societal restrictions. One way China implemented these societal restrictions was with foot binding, which also served as a way to show that you were rich, saying that your women didn't have to work. Their government was an imperial bureaucracy. It was a hierarchy between people that the emperor chose. It grew rapidly during this period and also helped facilitate the increase of the empire throughout China. The main way people got jobs in this system was either the emperor told them they could do this job or the civil service exam. This was basically people who took tests on Confucian ideologies and chose what they were going to do based on how well they did on the tests. Next thing, Buddhism, major part of this empire and religion. All you need to really know about Buddhism is that life equals suffering. Not much else other than there's four truths, but I don't think that's really important. Okay, in Song China, the economy and the population was booming. They commercialized, so they made lots of stuff like porcelain and silk, and they sold it to Eurasia, like the Middle East, which was Dar al-Islam, but I'll get to that and stuff. And then agriculture, main thing, super important in this period, champa rice. I do not want y'all to forget champa rice. This led to increase in the population. The increase in the population led to more commercialization in turn and transport. The Great Canal. This was just a series of waterways throughout China which helped facilitate trade throughout them and help interregional trade. Second empire you need to know in this time period, 1250 to 1450, Dar al-Islam. Basically, Dar al-Islam was a golden age of Islam, or the House of Islam. This was in the Middle East, Turkey, and all that stuff. It's one of the Abrahamic religions, like Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Islam was basically Muhammad, and he was the final prophet, and Jesus wasn't God, and final prophet and stuff. And Judaism was where there were Jews. I hope y'all know what Jews are, and they didn't believe in Christ and all that stuff. And then what happened during this period was the Dar al-Islam was falling off, and in turn, the Abbasid Caliphate was taking over. The Dar al-Islam broke up, and then the Abbasid Caliphate took over during this period, which was a tiny series of states that came together and made new laws and stuff. Like in the United States, we have states, and we have the whole country, but each state's its own thing. It was kind of like that. It was located with its center in Baghdad, and it broke up at the start of this period. Which led to the rise of new Turkic empire states. Turkic, not Persian, which is a major change in this period. Some of the Turkic states you need to know are the Seljuks, the Ottomans, Persians, and all that stuff. So basically, in the Seljuk Empire during this period, they were located in Iran, and they used the Abbasid Caliphate as their figurehead. They kept the empire together in a sense. It's like the British monarchy. They had a figurehead, but they had no political power. During this period, military expansion helped to keep the empire together, and laws from the Quran were used to facilitate trade and whatever. Tech and science. This was a major continuity during this area. During this period, the Middle East and Asia, science and technology was the main place for that stuff to happen. The main people you need to know are Nasir al-Bin, whatever you say his name. He invented trig, and most important thing in this period, House of Wisdom. This is where they collected all these different books, put them together, from Europe, from Africa, from Asia, and they put all these science books, books of wisdom, religious books, all in one place so they could be used together, and they translated them into Arabic. Main point. Even if you forget anything, remember that. And what you need to know about how they expanded, they used their military. Merchants to spread Islam, and they went on Sufi missions. The Sufi type of Islam is a type of mystical type of thing where it facilitated trade better because more people were easily able to do that. Going on to South and Southeast Asia during this time. During this period, there was 3 religions, Hindu, Buddhism, and Islam. But mostly in South Asia was Hindu, and Southeast Asia was Buddhism and Islam. And in South Asia, which is like India and Pakistan during that time, there was a Bhakti movement, which is basically where they believed in one Hindu god instead of multiple. And when the Abbasid Caliphate fell apart in this period over there, it led to Turkic states, and one of them was the Delhi Sultanate, which was in South Asia, which was Islamic. The leaders were Islamic, but the people they ruled over were Hindu. And another continuation was a however you say the empire in South Asia. Just remember they were on the south and Delhi Sultanate was up north. Khmer Empire. This is something you really need to know. This was important for the continuities and stuff. So basically, this empire was first Hindu and then changed to Buddhist. And Angkor Wat is its testament in like architecture and stuff, which led to them like changing from Hindu structures to Buddhist structures, which is a change in this period, which would be helpful to know. Okay, over in Europe during this period, all you need to know is that they're more focused on religion rather than science and trade and all that stuff. And during this period, there's 2 types of religions happening in Europe. There's the Orthodox and then the Roman Catholics. The Roman Catholics were the West and the Orthodox were the East. Mostly politically in Europe, there was just a bunch of tiny states, and they were feudalists, which is like a hierarchy, peasants at the lowest, and then they helped each other for safety and things. And then in Spain, it was Muslim during this period. They were like, people from North Africa traveled to Spain and conquered it and took it over and made it Muslim. And more about feudalism, peasants equaled the serfs during this period, and they were bound to the land, not to the people. They didn't own it like slaves, they were bound to the land. It didn't matter who was in charge of the actual people. And manorialism is a type of feudalism, which also just means to like rent the land, and the people are bound to the land. And there was like lords, kings, and they're used for protection, as I said. And then over in Africa, mostly all you have to know is about Mali, which is important, but I'll get to that. So in East Asia, there was a bunch of Swahili city-states which formed from trade, which is more important in the next unit, which I'll cover. But the Swahili city-states formed, which were Muslim, and they had a hybrid language. Most important thing about this is Mali, because that's a huge continuity. They had trade, which was basically from gold. That's all you really need to know. And I wouldn't really consider all of this. I don't think that's as important. In the Americas, important stuff. There was the Aztecs and the Incas, 2 important things. In the Aztecs, they had a tribute system, which is the main thing in this unit about them. And they were decentralized. They didn't have a central government holding together. Whereas the Incas had a bureaucracy and a hierarchy and used the Mita system. The Mita system was where they had people they didn't have to work for the government like a bunch of days, and then 1 week out of the year they made people work for them as like a way to pay their taxes. And they were highly centralized with one government. I believe it was in Timbuktu, or no, I forgot where, but that's not really important. And then the Mississippian culture, if you want to remember this is useful, this is the first civilization in North America, and they were satellite settlements. They weren't together. There's just a bunch of small settlements around the Mississippi River. Same time period, 1250 to 1450. This was about maritime empires and how they expanded. And like trade stuff. Okay. Unit 2. Okay. What you need to know is that in this unit, there's a bunch of goods, language, and religion and technology that changed. New ways of transportation, Silk Roads, Trans-Saharan, and Indian Ocean, the major one you need to know. Empires expanded and changed. They led to more trade cities, collapse of others, and they were more wealthy and powerful states due to more trade happening. The main things you need to know are the 3 trade networks, including the Silk Roads, Trans-Saharan Ocean, Indian Ocean one. In the Silk Roads, the main things you need to know about this is that they were made out of luxury goods, not anything except luxury goods, and they mainly came from China, which was silk and porcelain. This is across Asia from China all the way to Europe, but the Europe part is mostly taken out because they weren't big players during this period, so it's mostly just Eurasia. The increase in trade led to an increase in production, making China even more centralized and commercialized. Innovations that helped spread it were caravanserai, which are like pit stops where people, like motels, they could just rest down, like relax for the night. They led to safety and increased trade in the area. Commercially, they created paper money, which is just like the dollar bill and stuff, and helped trade. And then they invented credit, which is like I owe you something and then you owe me something later. And they were both invented in China, which is super important to remember. Trade led to the rise of new empires during this period too. Example being Kashgar. I will remember Kashgar because this might show up on the test, I'm pretty sure, on one of the LEQs. This was basically how, during this trade period, like from caravanserai forming all in one area, the caravanserai formed a city called Kashgar, which helped facilitate more trade in a middle pit stop in the area. And the Trans-Saharan Trade Network. This was Africa. I want y'all to remember that. Tech support. What am I saying? I'm tweaking out. Okay. Transport technology was the camel saddle, right? This is basically so they could put more stuff on the camel to travel with, because they didn't have carts and stuff back then. They just put them all on the camel. At Mali, see, this is where Mali plays in. Mali's super important because they were Islamic and they helped facilitate trade using gold and taxing. They're like a banking place in Africa. And then the king there, Mansa Musa, he was so rich off of gold, he used to like destroy empires wherever he went because he would just inflate them out of proportion with how much gold he had. Okay, Indian Ocean Trade Network. This is one of the most important ones I remember because it's really important in the later units too. This was maritime, right? The technology during this was the monsoon winds and how people figured out how they like flowed and stuff. Like if it was going to the right, they could go to the right faster than to the left. So they went to the right during this period. This is for common goods. The Trans-Saharan and like the Silk Roads was both luxury goods, but the Indian Ocean was bulk goods. That's a big change in this period. It was like textiles, spices, and wood. Wood was the most important one during this period. They also used the magnetic compass to sail, which like told them what direction they were heading, and the astrolabe, super important, and comes up in later units too. It figured out their latitude and longitude based on what stars they were seeing. During this period, China, like I talked about before, also invented the Chinese junk. It was just like a faster, bigger type of ship which could hold more stuff and keep it together. Just like in the like the Silk Roads, new forms of credit were formed, like flying money, and the other, I forgot what it's called, but new growth of states also formed, like Swahili city-states I talked about last year. This was a mixture of different states coming together and combining to form a different one, synthesizing. The Swahili city-states were on the east coast of Africa, like on the side closer to India. They were brokers for the inside of Africa, like as a port city, giving this for luxury goods. And they were Islamic, which also helped facilitate trade and joined Dar al-Islam. I guess the Swahili city-states were a type of diasporic community too, because they were a tiny spot of people from other places coming to live there. Like people from Europe also lived there and talked European in this tiny like city. It's like little China in New York, like all these Chinese people living in one area and like in a bigger city. It's kind of like that. That's what diasporic communities are. Mainly in Swahili city-states were the Arab and Persian communities. And main change you need to know is Swahili form, which is a mixture of African languages and Arabic. Big thing. I would remember this. In China, there was this new sailor guy who helped facilitate trade on the Indian Ocean. He was Zheng He. This sailor put more people into China's tribute system, which they had during this period. The tribute system China had mostly was like these surrounding areas like Korea, Japan, all these people had to pay a tiny tax of gifts or like whatever to the emperor. And that's how Champa rice was actually formed. The Vietnamese kingdom, the Champa kingdom, gave that rice to China, and China used that to make their population boom and stuff with more food. This guy was trying to go out there and add more people into the tribute system for China during the Ming Dynasty. During this period, the Song Dynasty fell and the Ming Dynasty formed, with the Ming Dynasty was the Manchu people, which is the second time, but I'll get to that in the next unit. Okay, consequences of continuity. Actually, let me get to the empires during this period to understand that later. Okay, so the first one is the Mongol Empire. Big change. The Mongols took over the Chinese Qing dynasty before. The Mongols took it over and created the Yuan dynasty. This major thing to know. This is the first time China got took over by another ethnically different people. They're the largest land-based empire, and they help facilitate trade. That's the most important thing you need to know about them. They kept all these people safe together and across all of Eurasia because they basically took over all of Eurasia, and they kept this area safe by killing anybody who did anything wrong. So no one dared to do anything wrong, and they kept it safe. And because it was more safe, more people were trading on the road, and it was flourishing. And this made them extremely wealthy and more connected throughout. And then during Mongols, it was a peacetime period for all of Eurasia. Some technologies they used were the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, like I talked about. They helped use those knowledges and technologies from there and facilitate all throughout Eurasia, which helped connect it way more. Okay, now the consequences of connections between these empires. There's two things. There's cultural and environmental connections. So culturally, religion transferred, obviously, like Buddhism. In India, Silk Roads, and in China, that's how it transferred from. It was formed in India, and then it led via the Silk Roads to China. In culture, there was also art and literature that transferred, like in the House of Wisdom. Because the Mongols took it over as all super connected, they helped diffuse that wisdom to all these other areas. These Roman and Greek stuff they translated to Arabic. And then this led to more information in Europe, which in turn led to the Renaissance, which is their scientific revolution. And main thing, I want you to remember this. Gunpowder was invented in the time period 1250 to 1450, but does not play a role until 1450 to 1750. It was invented now, but does not play until the next unit. And then China was basically in Muslim empires, and in Eastern Europe, that's how gunpowder transferred, but that's more on the next unit. And then states and cities fell and rose in power. So in China, it was the end of the Grand Canal because they focused more not on themselves, but on transforming and moving out to other areas in the world. In the House of Baghdad, after the Mongols took over, they destroyed the house and took all the information for themselves, even though they diffused it everywhere else. The main thing I want you to know is that Baghdad was in Istanbul, but we'll get to that. Travelers. Okay, I want you to remember Ibn Battuta. This man was super important. He's the only reason we know about all of this. Ibn Battuta was a young Muslim scholar who went all throughout Dar al-Islam and said he was talking about everything that was happening. That's the only reason we know everything. And environmentally, crops changed, increased the population, champa rice, diseases transferred. The bubonic plague happened in this period, which I hope you know, which led to the die-off of 1/3 of the human population. And China, it traveled with fleas on people on the Silk Roads from China. That's the period 1250 to 1450, these first two units. Now we're in the period 1450 to 1750. The main thing I want you to remember, gunpowder. Land-based empires during this period expanded, administered their technologies, their government, and they changed belief systems too. Land-based empires are empires whose power comes from the land and how much of land they own. There's a couple of these empires, which is the Ottomans, the Qing in China, the Safavids, and the Mughals. Starting off with the Ottoman Empire. This is founded in the 14th century, which is basically the late 1300s, which is perfectly on time for this. They expanded due to gunpowder weapons, which was basically they used cannons, shot everybody else, and remember where the Abbasid Caliphate was? When the Abbasid Caliphate fell apart, the Ottoman Empire took off from their ruins and built their empire upon them. They controlled the Turkey area again. Main thing, I want you to remember this date, 1453, main date. That's when Constantinople fell. That was the last part of the Roman Empire, and after this period, there was no more Roman Empire whatsoever after the Ottomans took it over, and it changed the name to Istanbul. If any day I want you to remember, it's 1453 when the Ottomans took over the last part of Rome. And during this period, they helped put their empire together using janissaries. These were like elite fighters. Since their own people didn't want to die in gunpowder weapons, they took Christian boys and they changed them to Islam, and then they used those people to like use these gunpowder weapons and shoot everybody, which is basically here. And I want you to remember this. The Ottomans were Sunni. I'll come back to that, but just remember that for me. The Ottomans were Sunni. And then here's the Safavid Empire. It was around the same time that the Ottomans formed, the Safavids also formed. This was a little to the right side of the Ottoman Empire, like in Iran. No, that's the left. I don't know where it is, but in Pakistan area, that's where I went. In that area. They expanded due to gunpowder again. All of them expanded due to gunpowder. And they created a system like the Janissaries. It doesn't really have a name. Just say it's like the Janissaries if they ask on the test. And they were Shia. I'll come back to that, but remember that for me. And then there was the Mughal Empire. This is where the Delhi Sultanate was, but they took over the Delhi Sultanate when they fell, and then they started the Mughal Empire in this period. It's just the same area. And do you know the Indian Empire, the Vijay, whatever that was? They also fell during this period, and the Mughal Empire took them over too. Same time the Ottomans formed. They expanded due to gunpowder, and main thing I want you to know is that they had a king called Akbar, and this guy was like religiously tolerant. He let other people like live in the area that were not Muslim, which is a huge change in this period. And then they were mostly like, they made money and stuff. They were doing good. Okay, back to what I was saying. The Sunnis, Shias, and the Mughals were also Sunni, by the way, just like the Ottomans. So I want you to remember, 2 Sunnis, 1 Shia. During this period, the main conflict, these two had a conflict, these two had a conflict, these two were besties. The Safavids always caused drama in this period. They're like horrible people. Just because they were Shia and they thought that after Muhammad, they had to be blood relatives in charge. The Sunnis, who believed that there could be anybody who had enough knowledge who could be the next prophet or whatever, they believed that. So during this period, the Safavids caused stuff with the Ottomans because they wanted their religious beliefs to like go on instead of the Ottomans, which led to conflicts between them. And then the Mughals and the Safavids fought for the same reason, but these two also fought for a territory, which is over here. I'll get to that. So Safavid-Mughal conflict, if I want you to remember a conflict, I want you to remember this because it's the easiest one to remember. Just remember they fought over land, which is modern-day Pakistan. They fought over that. And then they fought because they were Shia and Sunni. That's basically, and then there was no like victor in this war. There was just fighting. Main thing I want you to know. And in China, after the Mongols took over, the Mongols fell and created this new empire, which is the Manchu Empire. These people were ethnically Manchu. Second time China gets taken over by a different group of people. They took over due to gunpowder weapons again, like cannons and stuff. And comparing all of these empires, they're all land-based. They expanded due to gunpowder, and some were ethnically different from their subjects. Like in the Mughal Empire, they were different from they were Islamic in their leaders, and they were Hindu in their population. Main thing I want you to know, these empires legitimized and consolidated. I'm sure 100% these two words are going to show up on your test Monday. Legitimize means as a method they used to establish authority in this period, and consolidated means is how they used to use their power and stuff to get power from other people. I want you to remember these two words, because if you get them confused up, you're cooked. There was bureaucracies in this period, which were basically how they legitimized power. This was like a bunch of people, exactly like I talked about in Unit 1 when China uses the, what's it called? Let me go back to it, 1 second. Oh yeah, the civil service exam. It's kind of like the civil service exam, but they like use that system to like group all these people together and give them jobs in the area. And they also had a system in the Ottoman Empire. They had a devshirme system, which is basically the janissary system. That's basically all it is. And they used military professionals, which is the janissaries are really important. I want you to remember that for the test. They also used religion, art, and architecture. They used. I want you to remember Europe, because Europe might show up on the test. I feel like this is the most important one to talk about. In France, they invented the Palace of Versailles during this period, which led to huge changes in this system. And there was a divine right of kings, that kings in Europe were like given power from God himself, and that's why they had the right to rule over their subjects. Tax systems. This played a major role in this period. More than the zamindar, I want you to remember tax farming, which is the Ottomans. Tax farming Ottomans. They gave their right to tax to the highest bidder, and this led to corruption since the highest bidder overtaxed them, skimmed off the top amount, and then gave the rest to the government. And then the Aztecs, I want you to remember this, they used tribute systems, just like China and stuff, where they took a little bit from each area, and that's the reason they got all that power. Belief systems. This was kind of a huge change, but not at the same time. Europe, Christianity was still forming, the two main parts, Roman Catholic and Orthodox. Islam, major change. It was the same continuity with all of it expanding, but the Safavids were Shia, and they caused problems with others. They caused all this drama, and they made a huge split in the area. Big thing. If they asked for a change in this period, or how these empires formed together to syncretize to create a new thing, talk about Sikhism. This was a blend of Islamic and Hindu properties. Just talk about how they kept one God from Islam, and they made no gender hierarchy in Hinduism. That's mostly the main important things. Same time period, 1450, 1750, maritime empires. This one was land-based empires. This one is maritime empires. Okay, so basically in this time period, Europe was the main person playing this game of maritime empires in this period. Let's talk about causes first off. Why people want to do maritime empires in the first place. Main reason, they had new technology, so they wanted to test it out, of course, which is like ships and stuff. Compass. Main thing I want you to remember, in the past 3 units, the astrolabe. Huge role, latitude and longitude based on the stars helped them. And the Arabs in this period, from the House of Wisdom, invented a new lateen sail and kept it together, which helped facilitate trade faster on the time period. Also in Europe, they made an invention in ship design, like the Portuguese caravel, which is small and fast. The caravel was small and fast. They also made the Dutch flute, which is a bigger ship, but held more cargo, but I didn't write that down. And the understanding of monsoon winds plays a huge role in this period, which helped facilitate the trade in the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. The growth of state power also helped continue this trade system going on. I want you to remember monarchies. In Europe during this period, France was the first monarchy to form, and that led to other places thinking, that's not such a bad idea. I want to be a monarchy too. And all of Europe turned into these tiny kingdoms everywhere instead of these decentralized states with lords and all that. And centralized. Main thing, the main reason Europe could even do this was because they were centralized. During this period, they used economic system called mercantilism. This was basically the whole world is a huge pie, and you want a slice of that pie. And you want the biggest slice you can. That's all you need to know. And then the pie they're talking about is gold and silver. They want the hugest share of gold and silver they can get. Balance of trade, I hope you know this. Lots of exports and less imports because you want to save money, Colonies. In this period, maritime empires led to new colonies like the Americas forming, where they took resources from America and industrial, but that's later, we get to that. But that's just setting it up for that. And then joint stock companies, big thing. The only reason these places were even able to go to all these places was because of these companies. These companies, the government sent these companies off to these places to to help them colonize and take it in for their own country, but they help them, give them a monopoly, means like that company controls all the trade that's in that one area, so they get all the money. Like Dole, which took over the Hawaiian islands, they controlled all the pineapple production in the area and helped facilitate, like they had a monopoly on pineapples. But I want you to remember for this time period, the Dutch East India Company, or the VOC. That's most likely how it's going to show up on the test, the VOC. I want you to remember the VOC just means the Dutch East India Company. This was basically on India, I hope you know, and then it just increased influence in the area. Main thing is that they were funded privately, but they were able to get these rights from the government to actually go there. I'll get to the Columbian Exchange. Let's talk about the empires that actually formed during this period. Okay, so there was the Portuguese, the Dutch, Spanish, French, and English. So basically, there's only a couple of things you need to know about each one. It's not that much. So Portugal, all you need to remember is they wanted gold, and they had trading post empires. The trading post empires was bare bones communities. These are like tiny. It was just like a tiny hut. They didn't want to facilitate trade. They just wanted a place to like trade off of. So they just built these like tiny communities, like a couple of houses here near the coast, which helped give them a port of access. Spanish, on the other hand, made colonies and stuff. This guy, Spanish was Christopher Columbus. I hope y'all know that. Discovered America, all that stuff. They also discovered the Philippines. They colonized it, and then they took over the area and made coffee production. Main change in this unit is that they use coerced labor. This wasn't big, like really a change because they did that stuff in Europe, but this was a different thing where it comes to the triangle trade. I'll get to that when we go to the Columbian Exchange. And they also use a tributary system like they used in China. Starting off, the Spanish were the reason everything else started off. After the Spain started going to all these places, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, and the English, they all followed them back. And I was like, I want to share this pie too. So they all went along with one another. And then France. France was really just fur in Quebec. And Quebec is north, right Canada. That's all you really know about French. English. English had quite a history in the Americas. So I want you to remember this guy. Not really a name, just know there was one guy. He tried to establish a colony in some island near the coast, but it failed until they had a colony in Virginia, which was much later on. And this man also set up a trading post empire in India, fighting with the Dutch VOC like I talked about in the past. So the English were also fighting for India. Main thing you need to know about them. And here's the Dutch. Indian Ocean, that's all they wanted. They took it all over. And then New York was called New Amsterdam, which they took. So the British were in like Virginia, and the Dutch were in New York during this time period. And then they had a monopoly on Indian spices that the British wanted to go over, but they had trouble until like a couple minutes later. Why say minutes? Like a couple decades later. Okay. We're going to get to the Columbian Exchange now. All I want you to know about this, there's not a lot to know actually. It's just that it helped transfer disease, food, plants, and animals, led to environmental change. So the main change was disease. Smallpox killed thousands of Native Americans. Boom, done with disease. Food and plants. Okay, there's like multiple examples you could know, but the ones I like to prefer to know from Old World to the New World, which was like Europe to the Americas, is wheat, and from the New World to the Old is not potatoes, corn, which is maize. Corn from the Americas to the Old World was corn. From the Old World to the New World was wheat. That's basically all there was about food and plants. But for also in this period, actually, in addition to that, never mind. There was cash cropping, which is basically these farmers only planted one type of crop. They didn't plant multiple, only one type of crop to make as most as they can, and they sell it off to all these people. An example would be sugarcane in the Bahamas. Yeah, they made sugarcane in the Bahamas, which are, I believe, the Spanish who took over that area and made the sugarcane over there. Big thing, animals. Just like I talked about plants and food, which aren't that big, animals, huge thing. Even if you don't remember all this, I don't need you to. Remember horses. Super important. This helped the Native Americans take over more land much faster, helped them hunt, helped the British and all these like people take over the land much faster again. Horses, huge game changer in Americas. It facilitated diversity and everything. Okay, resistance to imperialism. Because of all these maritime empires taking over, colonizing, all that stuff, some people resisted, obviously. Like in Asia, I want you to remember Japan. Japan resisted this. They created a new type of government called the Tokugawa shogunate, which is basically, they put this military leader in, it's like the British monarchy, kind of. It's really useful to rename that, even though I'm doing it a lot. The British monarchy is like, the queen is like the figurehead, which is like the actual emperor of Japan, but the prime minister, which would be the military leader, was actually in control of all this. So they kicked out all of Europe, and then because Europe was like transferring religion like Christianity over there, and they did not want that. They wanted their own ideals. So they kicked out all of Europe and like isolated from everybody else. And in Europe, the Fronde happened, which was in France, obviously, because we all hate France. This was just basically a series of revolutions that, because the peasants weren't getting enough food, it's just a tiny revolution compared to what would happen later on. But the French monarchy crushed the resistance. Just know it failed. Enslaved people. This is a big thing. I know this is going to show up on your test. On a DBQ, LDQ, whatever. So enslaved people. I want you to remember, some slaves ran away and just hid from their governments, like the British or whatever. But main example, I remember Queen Anne because it's a funny name. Obviously, I would remember that. Queen Anne was basically like this runaway slave leader, which overthrew the Spanish in the Bahamas Islands, I believe. And like they set up their own colony, and then they got like a treaty between the two states from all this war that was happening between like them fighting and rebelling. So they got a treaty so they could be free, which is the Caribbean. Okay, in this period, African states. I wouldn't really remember this. The Kingdom of Congo plays an important role though. Later units, so I would remember this one. They had Portuguese ties, and basically all of Africa is just for gold. Everyone loves gold in Africa. The main thing I remember is just gold. Columbian Exchange. I'm going to come back to this. I totally forgot about this. But there was a triangle trade going on, right? Let me show you. So there's a triangle trade going on. This is Africa. Give me a second. Africa, Europe, and New World. So in Africa, it was slaves. New World was crops. This was guns. So Europe gave guns to Africa so they could get slaves, and they sent the slaves to the New World so they could farm and create crops, and that stuff was like triangle trade happening. Main thing. Okay, continuity and change. Indian Ocean Trade Network. Give me a second. Okay, Indian Ocean Trade Network. This is a huge continuity since the last time period, since they were still using this, obviously, like all the other groups of people, like the Ottoman Empire, they were still using this. A main change in this, the main change in this, though, was that the Europeans took control of this and had the most power in the network. But the continuity still lasts. The Middle East, South Asia, East Asia, all those still continued use of it. By the way, just put this out there. I'm gonna have this link down in the transcript or whatever. I'm gonna have this down in there so y'all can access these notes for yourselves. But anyway, back to this. They had this road was still used for like bulk items, food, major goods, wood, stuff like that. Just that. Another change in continuity would be the Atlantic Ocean, which was a huge change. Before this time period, no one really used the Atlantic Ocean because no one discovered a new world, so they had no point of using it. So they opened that. It led to cash cropping in the Bahamas and all that. Silver. They got a ton of silver from the Americas. And mainly the only thing they wanted from the Americas too was silver, which helped the Chinese economy boom because they were all interconnected. Just like I was talking about here. While all these empires were going on and expanding and all that stuff, at the same exact time, a lot of people get this confused. As the same time these people are doing their thing, over here, these people are doing their exact same thing at the exact same time. I've seen a lot of people get confused over that. So basically, that happens, Atlantic Ocean, which leads to coerced labor in the Americas, slaves, triangle trade, all that. Labor systems. The Spanish used the Midas system, right? Same thing, but the Spanish overly abused it. They made people work longer on for their government rather than for themselves and the stuff they were doing, which affected a ton and wasn't really good. Chattel slave. This just formed, which is instead of people like serfs being tied to the land, this was where some people owned other people and they were less, and then the slaves were less than them, which is total ownership. Main thing I want you to remember, this was race-based. This was not economic, this was not societal, this was race-based entirely. African slave trade, which was basically triangle trade again. This led to more men being taken out, so there was less people and stuff. Indentured servitude. This is basically you sign a contract for 7 years and you work for the 7 years and then you're free. That's it. This was mostly used by the British, not other places. The British are weird. And encomienda and hacienda. Just as the Spanish were also using chattel slavery and then the Midas system over there, they're also using these two systems. The hacienda, I want you to remember, the only thing you really need to know is the hacienda they owned the people, so they used that. And the hacienda, it was tied to the land. It was hacienda is kind of like feudalism, and encomienda is kind of like chattel slavery. Main thing you need to know. Belief systems. Okay. There was a big change. There was Christianity in the Americas. Major change. That's what they used to justify why they colonized these places. That they were transforming them into Christian societies, helping them out. And then in African governments, in their belief systems, they had voodoo arts and stuff, which is a combination of Islamic and voodoo dolls. I hope you know what that is and all that. Social hierarchies, huge change. Ethnic and religious diversity played a huge role. They were Jews. Matthew. Jew. Okay, anyway, side note. So, the Jews were basically in Spain and Portugal, but they got rid of them in this period because... Never mind, I'm not going to make the joke, but they got rid of them in this period. The Ottomans took control of this area too. The Ottomans took the Jews in and gave them a spot because they were religiously tolerant. The Ottomans and the Mughals were religiously tolerant. The Safavids were not. They're always causing drama. So basically, political elites happened in this period too. Spanish had the casta system, which is, let me show you an example of the casta system. I think that will work better if it loads. Give me a sec. Too far. Too far again. Okay, here we go. Here's the caste system. This was basically these people were born in Spain, and these people were born in the Americas, but are still completely Spanish, Spanish parents completely. These below people, these are Africans and natives, and these are people born in Spain, and then people born in America who were Spanish, and then their babies. That was basically the order of it. So back to this. Oh, also, The Qing Dynasty, which was ethnically Chinese, fell, and then the Manchu happened, which is basically the second time China got taken over by the Manchu people, which are completely ethnically different. Important to know. I would remember this. I don't know if it might help. I might though, because college board's a little crazy. But Russian boyars, which is basically like feudalist systems in Russia, but it got removed during this period. Yeah, we don't have African states. Okay. Huge change. This is where we got to see the modern stuff happen, like gunpowder being used, revolutions, American Revolution, all that stuff. Periods 1450 to 1750. These are the next two slides. There's the Enlightenment, which was basically, this started off the series of revolutions, all that stuff from even happening in the first place. So basically during this, these gave people ideas that I want to be myself. I want to have my own rights. So I want the right to have power in the government, all that stuff from happening. The main two people I know and I like to remember is John Locke and Voltaire, because they're both easy to remember, I guess. John Locke was natural rights, and Voltaire was free speech and religion. Voltaire, I'd like to remember his religion. Locke was to overthrow the government. Helps remember, because that's overthrowing the government. It's really, okay, never mind. Okay, and in this period, there's the American Revolution, right? I'll say all the revolutions first. There's the American, Haitian, French, and feminist. Okay, I'll talk about the American Revolution because it's the easiest. So basically, and it was the first revolution to happen, in fact. It started off from Enlightenment ideals. The British and the French had the war over in the Americas and all that stuff, increased taxes on the U.S. to pay off their debts. They didn't like it. Revenue Act, Stamp Act, Tea Act, hope y'all know. The U.S. sent the Declaration of Independence. They won. Only government to ever win against the British militarily. This led to them being a colony. Articles of Confederation, which failed, which led to the Constitution. And the main thing I want you to remember, huge important thing, this inspired other revolutions. American Revolution inspired others. Right after the American Revolution, the French Revolution took place. This was a different type of revolution from what happened in America. America was trying to overthrow its government as a colony, but the French people in the French Revolution wanted to overthrow the government for economic problems, not societal problems. So basically, the French Revolution was caused by Enlightenment ideals. Again, all these revolutions are caused by Enlightenment ideals. The people were so poor in this time period that they couldn't even eat, and war debts from the French and Indian War led to the stuff. Food shortages, Estates General, which was like a meeting, and then this led to the people creating a 10-score oath, which led to the National Assembly of the French people, which helped them decide if they were going to have a revolution or not. What really happened in this time period was the estates, which were in France, like the hierarchy in France during this period. The 1% of the population were the clergy, the actual king and stuff. The aristocracy, which were the 2%, like the people, the governors and whatever. 97% were the citizens. All these people couldn't even eat. These people were having cake. Obviously, people were mad, so they overthrew it. The effects were the end of the absolute monarchy, but the revolution entirely really failed because Napoleon took over, and which led to led back to a monarchy, but it wasn't an absolute monarchy. This is the order of the events, basically. The monarchy ended, reign of terror happened, which is like this government, like no government, chaos, whatever. Napoleon takes over, and that's basically it. A monarchy again, so that didn't lead to much. This was caused by the American Revolution, and this was caused by the American Revolution. The Haitian Revolution. This was basically Enlightenment ideals, caused again this revolution. This happened after the French and American Revolution, the Haitian Revolution. Social class. This was like the French. This was not like the American Revolution about economic. So American Revolution was economic. The French was kind of economic, but mostly societal. And then this was also kind of societal with class tensions and slaves revolting. Like I talked about in the Bahamas where the slaves revolted. Same thing, but in the Haitian Revolution now. So basically, I'll get to this guy later. This led to independence, led to a republic forming, and then this guy led the slave revolt so that's what really kicked off this revolution, the slave revolt, and then this led to new developments in the area from what? This led to new developments. Latin America Revolution. I don't think it's really important. All you need to really remember, every single country in Latin America had a revolution. They all won, all became their own separate states. Boom. Documents, if you want to remember. Documents ties to Enlightenment ideals directly. Documents like the Declaration of Independence, like I talked about, undeniable rights, pursuit of happiness, and all that stuff, directly ties to Natural Rights by John Locke. It's just like examples if they ever ask. Or the Declarations of Rights. This was in France about their new stuff. Free but equal, liberal property. Same as John Locke's ideas. That's why I really like to remember John Locke. He's really helpful. Okay. The feminist movement. Women, because of these revolutions, wanted rights. Just know they got denied. Boom, now we get to the big stuff. If anything in this unit, remember the IR. The IR was a huge change. It created technology, flying jennies, spinning shuttle, engine, steam engine, locomotives. There's all these examples, right? The main one I want you to remember are these two right here. The steam engine and the locomotives, which are really important. But I'll get to that. But also in this unit, there's the assembly line, Model T, telegraph, telegram, light bulb. But those aren't as important as these two over here. So basically, the first revolution, there's two revolutions to the Industrial Revolution. The first revolution was mechanical power, gears, all that stuff, and steam power, which is you heat up liquid, pressurizes, boom, you got the gears moving. Second revolution, to what we know now, steel, this was with gas, like oil and stuff, oil. Okay, this led to new science forming and mass production. This also led to mass production, but not on the scale from oil production and all that stuff. There were huge effects from this. There was an invention of the middle class. Before there was only super rich people, super poor people. But now we have the middle class from people working in factories. And these factories had really poor working conditions, low wages. And I want you to remember this change. This uprooted, like in the slaves, like we talked before, where all the men had to go to this stuff and there was only women left in Africa. Same thing here, all the men had to go to work and the women stayed at home because the feminist movement up here failed. This led to huge urbanization, cities forming. London was a major one. Okay, I want you to remember this. The IR first formed in London because, like they talked about here, the British from the colonies in the Americas, they got so rich off of that, they could have the power to industrialize with all these sources just readily available to them. So they were the first to industrialize. So that's what London was the first to urbanize. This led to a bunch of pollution and housing shortages, though, because of the industrialization. But still, some people didn't like the IR and resisted it. Like communism with Karl Marx. I hope y'all know what communism is. And factory workers didn't like the poor working conditions because they were dying so much. So this led to labor unions, like people grouping together saying, we need these laws and we need them now. And they made a minimum wage so people didn't just get paid like 1 cent per hour. Okay, and then after it starts in Britain, it spreads to other places like the United States. I'll talk about a couple examples and what did happen in each. So in the United States, laissez-faire, which is a type of economic policy like capitalism formed. They had tax breaks, and main way these people industrialized was railroad. We love the railroad system. Great, help. Only reason we industrialized, and they focused on steel. We focused on steel and oil. Russia. Okay, I want you to remember this. These are privately supported industrial revolutions. Whereas Russia's state-sponsored industrial revolution, the government helped these people start off the IR by giving them money or whatever. This was built by the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which is actually kind of like the U.S. We love the railroad, like I said, which helped facilitate trade throughout the nation. Again, like the U.S., steel-focused. Steel, steel, steel. Steel is important. Japan, on the other hand, Matthew Perry was this American guy who went to Japan saying, we need you to trade or we're going to take you over and force you to do this. So they did that. This led to the end of the Tokugawa shogunate. Rail again, we love rail. And then the Industrial Revolution happens. Changes. Huge change was the IR happening. That's a big difference. Politics changed, and then production went straight through the roofs. Straight up. Continuity, gender equality, because the feminist movement failed, women were still unequal, huge amounts of racism, and lower class exploitation, just like in the French, like we talked about over here. Like in the French we talked about over here, about these 1, 2, and then 97%, just like that. There's also like exploiting classes and then using it, and all that stuff is happening too. Now to Unit 6. Okay, I had to take a snack break, but we're back to Unit 6, right? Same continuity with the time period 750 to 1900. But I totally forgot what this unit was about, but we'll just get into it. So with those French revolutions and all these revolutions happening, imperialism happened as well during this time period. It was basically like these governments took over other places, made colonies, or they use another type of rule where it's like economic dominance, which is basically where these populations, let me give you an example, let me think. Okay, here we go. So United States and Japan, they made these unequal treaties for economic dominance. Like Japan had to pay it, so they like colonized them technically because they were only able to work with the United States. Motives. The main reason people even imperialized was money, obviously. They wanted to civilize them, which you gotta remember the name, which is the white man's burden, which is they wanted to civilize them. Building onto this, they wanted nationalism. Nationalism, like one's proud of one's country is nationalism, basically. So they wanted to, They wanted to support their country, expand their country, so they did that. A nation. To know what nationalism is, you need to know what a nation is. It's just a group of people with like a common topic, like it could be culture, language, all in one area together. Another reason was social Darwinism. Like, I'm better than you. I'm owning you now. That's basically what social Darwinism is. Genetically, I'm better than you. Main thing I want you to know, this is a huge continuation for the past, like, all the time. Spread of Christianity. They wanted to help these people become Christian, so they took them over, and then that was a justification. There's some good to this and some bad. Okay. Indigenous people also revolted, like we talked about in the past. The governments revolted, but here the indigenous people revolted against imperialism. Okay, I remember. Unit 6 is totally about imperialism. In these indigenous people, I want you to remember are like the Ashanti Kingdom, the Ghost Dance Movement, the Anglo-Zulu War. But there's all these examples, but all I want you to remember are 2 of them. There's one in Africa and there's one in the Americas. Okay, so there's a Xhosa cattle killing movement, which is basically where these British people took over this land in Africa. I don't remember where exactly. I think it's Southeast Africa, yeah. And these people like killed their cattle because they thought their gods would come and help them, and say they killed their cattle because they felt sorry for them. But their cattle died, and then they half starved to death. And then the British won, obviously. And then in the Americas, there's the Ghost Dance Movement, which is basically where these Native Americans thought dancing was going to bring their ancestors back. Oh, am I laughing? They danced, and then they spread to other tribes, and there's these like a bunch of tribes just dancing out there. But this failed, and the America took over, obviously. Manifest Destiny. Heck yeah, dude. But also another reason they wanted to imperialize. They wanted cotton and stuff. They wanted natural resources. They wanted cotton from India, the British, the rubber from the Amazon. There's a lot of examples, but I want you to know cotton, palm oil, and silver. Cotton was India. Palm oil, this helped engines run on the stuff. Engines, industrial gear, like smoothing it out, helped them run. This is from West Africa, and silver was from Latin America. 3 I want you to know. Okay, the only reason the Industrial Revolution even happened, I told you, railroads, super duper duper important. Steamships across the ocean were 3 times faster than regular ships from the Latin sail, and help spread ideas insanely fast using telegraphs and telephones, connect 3 different worlds. Economic imperialism, like talked about here. British East India Company. In this period, you remember the Dutch VOC? Completely gone. The British took over. Boom. The British are in control now. There's the Opium Wars in China and the British. Okay, so in the last period, we talked about how China was like dominating and stuff. So basically, after that, silver from the Americas that British and all these European states went to China from all these porcelain trades and all that. And then they were isolated. China was isolated, so they didn't want to like trade or whatever, so they just kept hoarding all the gold. So the British drugged all these people and made them addicted to opium, and they forced the money back into their hands. But China didn't like their people who were getting stuck in opium, so they went to war with the British. But because China was so isolated, it didn't have the Industrial Revolution yet, so the British obviously won and took over. This led to the Treaty of Nanjing, which the British made unfair treaties with the Chinese to force them to trade even more. This led to the Taiping Rebellion within China, failed. Boxer Rebellion within India, failed. The British were still winning. Because the reason these people could win was because they industrialized. That's the main thing. They were so powerful because they industrialized. Okay, migrations and labor systems. Let me talk about a couple people migrated. Actually, let me talk about labor systems because there's only a couple. Low wage still remains the same, even though there's a minimum wage. It was super low. And there's contract work, 7 years, you stop working. Okay, I want you to remember Chinese to the United States. Even if you don't remember all this, just remember China to the United States. So Chinese went to the United States via the Pacific Ocean, and they helped build the railroad. That's what I want you to know. They helped build the railroads, which helped facilitate the IR and trade more in the United States. Chinese built railroads in the United States. Boom, done. Okay, and then diasporas. Like I talked about tiny groups of people living together. Chinese lived in like California and led to the gold rush and railroads in the United States. Main thing I want you to remember. And the Irish. The Irish left because of a potato famine, so they were starving because they ate like 13 pounds of potatoes per day, and that's all they ate. And the potatoes are having like a drought or whatever. Potatoes didn't grow. So them Irish, they left, came to the U.S. Boom. Effects of people, the effects of these two things led to discrimination. So the U.S. didn't want so many Chinese people, they made like a law saying, you can't have any more Chinese in here anymore. And then there was the white Australia policy. There's only whites in Australia. Get rid of everyone else. Australia also did the same thing. It's the same thing as the U.S. Chinese immigrants also went to Australia and did the same thing. Change and continuity. Change was politics, production, treaties. So, like Treaty of Nanjing, like I talked about over here, huge change, Boxer Rebellion, all that stuff. Production went through the roof with the IRA. You gotta remember, like, people get confused of this all the time. These two units, same exact thing, happening at the exact same time, okay? Still, gender doesn't play a role until the 1900s and above. So there was still gender inequality, racism, exploitation of lower classes. Same exact things as all the other units. Now we get into the rest of the course is just 900 to now, 1900s to now. You gotta remember, everything I talk about from now is all from the 1900s to now. Every single thing I say. We're gonna start off with shifting power. So basically in this time period, In Russia, a dynasty ended and it led to communism with Karl Marx. Karl Marx's ideas actually like came into play here now. Like I talked about during the revolutions, they didn't play a role, but now they are with the form of communism in Russia. The Qing dynasty collapsed, which is the last dynasty that happened, and led to Mao Zedong with the Republic. Mao Zedong. Okay. There's the Ottoman Empire, which formed, right? The Ottoman Empire was still there, but it was like diminishing because they didn't industrialize. They were really bad at industrialization. So they were like falling apart because they were so much less powerful in these places. They were in World War One. When we get to the wars, still in Turkey, still all that places. Give me a sec. Okay. And during this time period, the Mexican Revolution happened. It didn't happen in the past with other revolutions. The Mexican Revolution just happened. Now we get into the World Wars. So World War One started off with Maine. But in Maine, there's major things, which is militarism and alliances. If I want you to remember something, I remember alliances in Maine. But Maine is really helpful. Maine, militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism. Okay, causes. War technology, machine guns. That's basically it. Machine guns. Tanks were new. This was a change in warfare. Tanks were new. But if anything, I remember machine guns, really helpful, really easy to kill a bunch of people. Boom. Tanks did big boom. And the World War One was the Paris Peace Conference, right? That's the reason the war ended. In this place, they had the Treaty of Versailles. They put all the blame on Germany. Well, I didn't even talk about the Axis powers. So the Axis powers are basically, there's the Axis and the Allied powers. The Axis powers were, let me show you. Axis was basically Germany. Give me a sec. It's Germany, Japan, and that stuff. And Allied powers were the US of A, British, all that stuff. I said it, you don't need to see my handwriting, okay? I know what you're thinking. Okay, but basically that, and this led to a setup like the EU that we have today, but it's called a League of Nations back then, which helped safeguard the area. After the war, because they spent so much, okay, this was the first total war. I'm gonna get to that first. This was the first total war, which means that before all wars were like just a tiny group of people that went to war. But a total war means that every single part of the government, of an economy, the economics part I'm tweaking. Everything about a country is geared straight to war, nothing else. You want to go to war? That's it. Everything is geared to war. That's what a total war means. They had lots of war reparations, mostly Germany. We know what that leads to, World War II. Because of so much reparations, they just started printing money. Hyperinflation boomed down. U.S. stock market crashed. No one had enough money to buy stocks, obviously. And the U.S. was thinking about changing their economic policies, but didn't. Okay, let's talk about economic responses. Japan had exports dropping because they were fighting on the Axis powers and no one liked them. So exports dropped, but they recovered fast after the war. Russia had a new policy called the New Economic Policy, which was by Lenin. You don't really know what it's about. I don't even know what it's about. Doesn't matter. Mexico, oil industry. Oil was a huge part of this industry. This helped like increase the IR. It's the only reason the U.S. really stayed in control, I guess. It was the Mexicans. Politics. Let's see. Fascism. There's fascism. I think that's really it. Everything else really stayed the same via politics. Like the U.S. was still democratic and all that stuff. Fascism was a big change though. That's what I want you to remember. Just know it led to violence and people blamed ethnic minorities. Fascism in play would be Italy with Benito Mussolini in this period, Adolf Hitler that's about to come up, and I think that's really it. And independence movements. It's like because of these wars after World War I, people didn't want to be part of those wars anymore. You gotta remember, during these wars, it wasn't just like countries as we know. Like, it wasn't just Spain. It was Spain's colonies also all going geared to war. So if the British were in control of India, which they were during this period, Indian people were also going to war with the British people during this period. So that's why they didn't want this, and they wanted independence. So India gains independence with Gandhi's civil disobedience and leads the Indian National Congress. Kenya gets independence, and the mandate system happens in the Middle East. I don't even know what this is. Just forget it. Cause of World War II. Boom. Hitler. He doesn't like Germany's facing all the problems and reparations from World War One. He's like, nah, we ain't doing this. So he sets up his own government. The only reason he really got into power was he was a good talker, but I'm just dumping information. But he breaks the Treaty of Versailles militarily. He industrializes, and then he makes more guns, all that stuff. He increases the military. And League of Nations, because of all this, they just disappear. They like tweak out and they like fall apart. Hitler expands into Poland. The only reason World War II started is Hitler expanding to Poland. Hitler was like, Germany's over here, right? Let me show you. Germany's over here, right? Here's a little bit of each country. Austria, all these stuff. Germany takes over this. Germany takes over this. All of this. Germany takes over that. This is Poland. No one really cared until they took over Poland because everybody likes Poland, right? So that's the only reason World War II even started. If Germany never touched Poland, World War II wouldn't have happened. And mass atrocities. And just these wars, the Armenian genocide, I wouldn't really remember that. Holocaust. I hope y'all know what the Holocaust is. Main thing. Nanking Massacre. Japanese killed a bunch of people because they didn't want them converting to Christianity. Boom. Main two I remember. Same time period, the exact same time period. Everything is happening. This is after World War II, though. During this time period, the Cold War. I hope y'all know what the Cold War is. It's gotta be common sense by now. It was basically ideas. The Americas was democratic. Russia was communist. They were fighting. They didn't really have a full-on war with each other. But like competing ideas, taking over areas, spraying their own ideas and stuff. Atomic power. This is the only reason they didn't go to war with each other. Atomic power. You're too scared of blowing up the whole world, so you just decide not to fight. But they were still they were on edge with each other. They were countries that remained independent and didn't side with either side because they were just newly independent, like I talked about here. They just newly like gained independence, so they didn't want to get in beef and like get imperialized again. So they just got left alone. So the U.S. were in containment. Their president right now was Truman with the Marshall Plan. I don't even know what that is. Forget about that. USSR, they supported economically. They're like, I'll help you economically, like to Ukraine if you turn communist, which they did. Boom, that stuff. It was Cold War. During this period. So they didn't want any more new wars. So the United States created NATO, which is North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It recently changed. I forgot what it changed to, but this was the main thing you need to know for the test. NATO was there, help safeguard the area, facilitate trade between the U.S. But the U.S. is the main player in NATO. The U.S. counts for like 2/3 of all money that goes to NATO, which is stupid, but we left NATO like a couple years ago. And then the Warsaw Pact with the Soviets, which is basically same thing as economic stuff. I'll help you, you help me. With like Warsaw was, I forgot who, but it's more. You should search that up. Okay, after the Cold War, this led to proxy wars, right? Because these two didn't want to fight each other themselves, because that would end horribly. So like, we'll make these two fight, and whoever wins, that's who I'm going to take control of. That's what they did. Main thing is North Korea, North and South. I hope you know that. Vietnam. Good morning. Okay, I've watched too many edits. But Vietnam happened. North, South. No winner. No winner. Afghanistan happened. Soviets turned Afghanistan Soviet. So Afghanistan was a win for the Soviets. Boom. Communism. China turned communist after Russia. Mao Zedong, all that stuff. Tiananmen Square. this wasn't a peaceful revolution at all when Mao Zedong came into power. The Tiananmen Square happened where they murdered these tons of college students because they were like fighting back, and they didn't want trying to turn communist instead democratic. So Mao Zedong ran over them with like with tanks and stuff, and killed them all. And then there's Iran, right? I wouldn't really remember Iran. There's not much to really. I don't think it's gonna show up. Egypt. This is important. Egypt. In this period, there's this new president. Egypt turned they turned towards the face of the United States. They became a republic. They created the Suez Canal for the British. Helped all that stuff. Pan-Arabism, which is like I'm proud to be Arab or whatever. South Africa. Oh, boom. This is really important. British took over South Africa. Apartheid happened. Slavery. Boom. We don't like that. All that. Population. Nelson Mandela, first president. African National Congress happened. This also turned the face of the U.S. after the Cold War. I think that's really it. For independence, India, I talked about Indian independence. Gandhi, this was peaceful. Gold Coast, there's not. I wouldn't really remember this one. Okay, armed resistance, Vietnam War. They didn't want America playing a role in that, so they just went by themselves. And Algeria, the French owned Algeria, and then they revolutionized, and they didn't want to like go there, so they gained independence in 1957. Israel, boom. After World War II, because of anti-Semitism, they wanted Zionism to happen, which is like, we want a homeland for the Jews, Matthew, which led to the Balfour Declaration. It's like, we'll give these Jews a home in Israel, as we know today. This had international support from everywhere. And Israel expands into Palestine, which leads to the conflict we have now. Intensifying conflicts. Okay, in Spain, I don't really... Okay, industrial revolutions. People still didn't like the industrial revolution, still fought against it, all that stuff. Al-Qaeda, terrorism happened, and because they don't want... Terrorism was in Afghanistan, I believe. They don't want the Soviets' communism. They wanted Islam to have its own, like, religion government in place, so oligarchy, so they didn't want all that, so they wanted themselves. The end of the Cold War. There's a couple reasons the Cold War ended. The first reason was that Afghanistan, when the Soviets entered Afghanistan, even though they took it over for some time, America came in, and then they boom kicked their butts out of there. Soviets lost after Afghanistan. This was like a domino effect. Soviets fell and led to Russia. Democratic movements, the Berlin Wall fell. Okay, main thing why Russia fell. Soviet Union fell. Gorbachev reforms. Glasnost. I don't really care about this one. Glasnost is the easier one to remember. People in the country revolutionized, and they wanted openness and freedoms, which communism doesn't give. So boom, coup in Russia, government fell. Unit line. Last unit, but then we get to like testing tips and quick notes on other periods. I wrote small on this. So globalism. This is like really from 1850s to today. Not 1850s, from 70s to what we are today, 2025. Globalization. Okay. The world was more interconnected, telephones, airplanes, all that stuff. What we call that, like being more connected, is called the shrinking of geographic distance, because we can communicate more easily and faster without really covering as much actual distance physically. This led to political, economic, and social changes. Communication technology, internet formed, boom, main important thing. Really it about communication. Just remember the internet. Transport, air travel, boom, main important thing. Air travel, like if anything, in the 1900s to now, if you forget anything, please remember shipping containers. This is the only reason we got all the technologies and stuff we did across the world, because of shipping containers. It held a lot, it's huge, lots of goods, helped transfer amazing. Shipping containers, super, super, super important. Energy and technology, petroleum. After the second iron industrial revolution, petroleum played a huge role in the system. This led to fuel, electricity, coal. It stopped coal, and increased production 5 times as much as what was happening. But with petroleum, as we know, comes pollution, and that led to new energy forms being developed, which is a change in this period. Nuclear power led to little pollution, but there was a couple of accidents, but we learned from them and changed, so it's relatively safe today. Medical tech change. So remember, they created antibiotics, penicillin, gave for like tiny colds and whatever. Vaccines and birth control. Okay, so vaccines. This started in China. You give a tiny piece of the dead virus to you, your body knows what the virus is, fights it off, helps treat polio, the cold, pneumonia, measles, birth control. Boom, boom, boom. Super important. Because of this, Japan's birth rate went down. Oh, but so Japan's birth rate went down, right? But all these okay, there's this like strange thing that's happening in here. So the population went down in developed nations, the U.S., Japan, and all these places. But population increased in developing nations such as India and in new African states, the population went up. So agriculture, the Green Revolution happened. So these places commercialized, so monocropping still happened. They want to maximize as many profits as they can with less losses. The Green Revolution was basically GMOs, right? Just remember GMOs. That's basically, and then they were like, the planting causes harm and all that stuff. The vegan teacher, but that's basically what the Green Revolution was. Okay, with disease, what I want you to remember with disease is that with disease more affects people with poverty than people who are like in wealthier countries. Like in the United States, we have better healthcare, so we're not as much. But less wealthy countries like in Africa are still affected by malaria and tuberculosis. While we just get some cough medicine and we're good, we're chill. So spread by mosquitoes, malaria, that's like African states, tropical regions. Tuberculosis was airborne. This was fatal. Not much you really need to know. Okay, epidemics and pandemics. That's where we get to today. Okay, spread of disease. This led to social disruption, like in COVID, like cities stopped working, all that stuff. But this also led to medical advances, like vaccines, like the COVID-19 vaccine. Let me give you some old stuff. I wouldn't really remember this, but 1918 influenza, Spanish flu. As people were building the Panama Canal, this happened. Tons of people died. Not very good. This spread really rapidly. HIV. I hope you know what that is. COVID-19. COVID-19 would be the easiest to remember, so just remember COVID-19. Okay, aging diseases. We learned that new studies from psychology and stuff figured out aging diseases in this period. Like Alzheimer's was a form of dementia, and heart and lung disease, like your heart gets weaker when you get older. Okay, some effects of globalization. There's environmental and physical land. Okay, environmental means what physical land change and what effect humans had on the land. So it's two parts. So there's land problems, right? Deforestation happened, destroyed like cities, destroyed habitats for these animals, clearing of trees. But deforestation happened for a reason. People want to urbanize, so in cities expand urban sprawl. If you took human geography, cities start off small, boom, expand, cutting out all these trees in the area. They also made room for farmland for these cows to like roam and stuff, like pastures, which killed like these tons of animals and plants in the area. But as an effect of deforestation, this led to desertification. It means that you don't have roots holding some dirt and stuff. Without those roots holding the dirt, it was just loose soil, and then the wind, like, there's dirt soil, and then the wind pushed the soil away. Whee! And there's, like, less nutrients in the soil because of that. Also, there's water and air pollutions and problems. Because of these cities industrializing, all that, London smog, remember, smoke and fog mixed together killed thousands of people. Air problems, like you said, great smog, fossil fuels problem. And people had competition over fresh water because that's really hard to find. Climate change. Okay, what I want you to remember here is that people argued over climate change. They argued over why it happened. Some people said it's natural. Other people said we're causing it. Main thing. That's all you need to know about climate change. Okay, let's talk about economics. Free markets like in the United States, that's happened. Neoliberalism was basically call it? Give me a second. Okay, neoliberalism was basically where these people colonize these places with economics. Like, I pay you to do this, pay you, which they horribly pay them, but that's what that is. And it was privately. U.S. economy focused on taxes. Everybody really focused on taxes. The poor and rich gap increased. Like, we have billionaires now. You know how much a billion is compared to like 100,000? That's crazy. The poor and rich gap increased. Global and economic institutions formed. So basically, in the United States today, we don't focus on a industrial society like factories. We pushed off to China and stuff. So we're what we call a knowledge worker. We focus on coding, working with computers, engineering, all that stuff. Like Finland is with software, Japan is with banking and finance, knowledge industries. Whereas these other places, like these developing, like Africa and whatever, is manufacturing factories, hard labor. This led to World Trade Organizations, which help contain these places, helps trade regulations, which is a really important supranational organization. First one you need to remember, World Trade Organization, really important in this period. And then there's also regional trade. This was worldwide trade and then regional trade. Regional trade, remember the EU. EU is really easy to remember. Helped facilitate trade between Europe, really easy, took out borders, stuff like that. Reforms and liberation, what really changed? Okay, human rights, people had rights for the first time, like real rights. There's universal rights from like supranational organizations like the UN, create human rights. The UN was formed, it stopped discrimination, created a Bill of Rights for every human across the world, no matter where you are. The negritude movement, which led to black equality and black culture in the United States. Civil rights movement, that's part of this huge negritude movement that happened worldwide. Liberation theology, which is basically like, they talk about Jesus Christ and how he's concerned for the poor and all that stuff. And this led to a major change in the Catholic Church. And then this led to more access to education for people. And more education led to women's suffrage, which first time women get rights. I'm saying they didn't have rights until right now. They had the right to vote, all that stuff. Civil rights in the U.S., negritude movement. Don't really need to remember this. Okay, reactions. What people really thought. Environmentalism, individual states did not like it, but it led to Greenpeace. It led to non-violence and more awareness about what's happening around the world. And the World Trade Organization, like I said earlier, just controls worldwide trade. Okay, so now we're done with the class, right? But I'm going to brush up on major topics in all these, like, time periods. So first time period, 1250 to 1450. Samarkand, like I said, a huge place, formed on the trading routes, helped as a pit stop, and then grew. Delhi Sultanate was first, and then the Mughal Empire. Swahili city-states were brokers. Mali, super important, gold trade, all that. Champa rice, and Black Death, environmental. That's what happened. Mongols, okay, so the empires that happened during 1450 to 1250 to 1450 were the Mongols, Delhi Sultanate, Inca, Aztec, and the government that Europe was in was feudalistic. 1450 to 1750. The Ottomans, Sunni, and Mughals. Safavids are Shia. The Ottomans are Sunni, Mughals are Sunni, Safavids are Shia. The Qing were the Manchu, and then the Yuan were the Mongols. The Manchu were first, and then the Mongols took over. No. My bad. The Mongols were there first, and then it went to the Han population, which are ethnically Chinese, and then they got taken over by the Manchu again. Ottomans tax farming, and the Protestant religion formed. I didn't cover that, but I'll say it right now. So basically, in this place place. Because there's the two churches, the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. The Orthodox Church was just chilling, doing stuff. The Catholic Church, they were using indulgences, and the people didn't like this. They're like, it never says this in the Bible to do so. So the Protestant Church formed. They fought against the Catholic Church, created their own church. Martin Luther, 95 Theses, I believe, stapled on a door, all that stuff. We watched the movie on it. That's basically it. But then the Catholic Church, after the Protestant Church forms, they made their own changes, took out a couple of bad things, and some people changed back to Catholic, but majority stayed Protestant. And Sikhism formed in India. Portuguese caravel formed. They were a trading post in power, bare bones. They barely set up anything. Colombian exchange, smallpox. Okay, Treaty of Torres. I didn't get to that over there. So the Treaty of Torres, which basically split the South America into the East and West. Spain got the East and Portugal got the West. Big thing, I'll remember that. Pueblo Revolt was just a Spanish revolt because people were tired of the Spanish converting them to Christianity, so they revolted for their own religion. And caste system, which I talked about. 1750 to 1900. There's the Enlightenment plus nationalism. There's two revolutions. It started in Britain first. The first one was 1830. The second was 1920. Railroads, super important. Okay, I didn't get to this over there. So transnational businesses, right? These are businesses with like headquarters in one area, the actual market in one area, factories in one area. Example would be Nestle. Nestle takes water from Africa. They're located in Switzerland. They sell to the United States. That's a transnational business right there. Middle class formed. Communism formed. Let's see here. See, the Ottomans tried to industrialize with the Tanzimat reforms. Completely failed. Berlin Conference happened, which is they split up Africa and took over to imperialize. That's really common sense, though. I hope you know that, or you're failing this test. Let's see here. That's really it. Cash crops, Irish. Yeah, I talked about Irish potato famine. That's really it for this unit that I didn't cover. In 1959, this might be hard to read, but I'm going to zoom in. Okay, so Russia, the Bolsheviks. So I'm going to talk about the Russian Revolution here. So the Bolsheviks were these like groups of people in power, but they fell out of power after the last person, I believe, like fell to like World War II, and they didn't like that, and then the revolution happened, and then it turned to the Soviet Union, and then the Soviet Union turned into Russia as we know now. Treaty of Versailles ended World War. Okay, the Treaty of Versailles ended World War I. Just putting that out there. Okay, Stalin had the 5 years plan, which kind of helped, but really didn't. Mao Zedong, decolonization. Okay, so UN super important. Remember the UN keeps everyone safe. Shipping containers, like I said, super important. Free markets, that's really it. Okay, now I'm going to go over some testing tips on this other page, right? So what I want you to remember. So for the multiple choice, my handwriting's bad, but I'm going to say it right. The multiple choice. I want you to go in this order. So they give you a stimulus, and they give you who. Give me a second. Let me make this a little bigger. Okay, so they give you a stimulus. They give you who it's written by. And they give you the question, right? In this order on the test. You'll see this on the left side of your screen. See this on the right side of your screen. I want you to do this first. This is going to help you out so much in how much time you have to do the test. I know this. It's a great strategy. Read the question. Read who it's by. If you can't answer the question by now, you should usually be able to. If it's not asking, like, what's the argument the author makes, if it's not one of those questions, you should really be able to answer what the question is just based on those two. Because this gives you a time period, and this gives you the question. But if it doesn't, and it's asking what the author does, then you read the stimulus, but you go in this order. Also, for the questions are with 4 answer choices, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. So what really happens is that 2 of these answer choices are usually the wrong time period, so you can cross out those 2. Then because it's 50-50 chance. Remember, you have to remember the time periods. That's the most important thing. Don't remember the units, remember the time periods. Because you can really cross out 2 of those just by seeing that they're in the wrong time period. And with these 2, you gotta see what the question is asking for. Because if it's about the revolutions, and this is talking about like in the same time period, it's talking about imperialism, 4 is wrong. You gotta see what the context is, but you got 50-50 chance after that. Okay, now to the DBQ. I want you to take like 15 minutes, read through the sources, and then boom, you get to start writing. What I want you to do is just, I don't care what Mr. Tuitt says, right? He might say, if you're adding and you're doing too much context, just brain dump everything you know about what happens in that time period. I don't care what it is. I don't care how long it is. Just dump everything you have on that unit. And in the thesis, you better say, if they ask to an extent, you say to a very high or very low. You use the word very. So they have to give you points. You can't get them taken away no matter what. For the LEQs, just choose whatever topic you care about, that you know about. I don't really care. A way for answering them, I like T. This is basically evidence. This is, and T is just, so it doesn't really rhyme, but T is where you restate. So you restate and answer the question, like add on from your thesis. So T is the format I like to use. So T is thesis. Because remember, when you write your thesis, you're scribbling at this point. Wait, just give me a second. Okay, T. So remember when you write your thesis, right? You use you say you're gonna cover this and this, and like you're gonna cover the social part, you're gonna cover the economic part. So this is what I do. So when I say thesis, like your context and your thesis, right? Boom, that's your intro paragraph. When you're doing an argument, you just keep repeating this T. This format, it's like thesis, evidence, and then it's the explanation of the evidence. So thesis is just, you say, like if you say to a high extent, it's going to affect it economic, political, and socially, you say it's going to affect it to a high extent socially. Boom, there you go, your thesis. You restated it, lead with evidence, answer, you repeat as many times as you need to cover all of your like stuff you stated in the thesis. That's basically a test. It's not hard, dog. Just chillax, and you should be fine. Boom.